Hello, I'm Dr. Manuel G. Saldivar. I'm a cognitive psychologist and a university faculty member. On this channel, I focus on ideas and concepts that will help you become more successful as a college student. Please join me for today's episode. Active reading is the key to deep learning. Let me explain what I mean both by active reading and by deep learning. Many times, especially coming out of high school, students have a model or a vision of reading that is very passive. This means that you will open up a textbook or a reading. Your eyes will kind of start at the upper left-hand side of the page and then scan across. And at some point you end up at the bottom right-hand side of the page, and then you go on to the next page and do it over again. The problem with this approach is that you're, number one, not necessarily providing your full attention. It is possible to start at the beginning of a chapter, for example, and then find yourself at the end, and then realize that you don't remember anything in between. This has happened to all of us. This is a signal that you're not really paying attention, that you're not engaging, that you're not reading in an active manner. The other problem is that by using this approach, you are treating everything on every page as being of equal importance. If you start on page 1 and then read through to the end of the chapter without pause, without trying to be thoughtful about different vocabulary terms, different concepts, different ideas that are being presented, you're just trying to soak them all up equally as if your brain's a sponge, you will find that your takeaway from the reading, your understanding is going to be very minimal. At best, you might be able to parrot back, to repeat back some vocabulary terms or some basic ideas that you've just memorized. But if you don't really understand what you're saying, you will probably end up having that information leave your short-term memory as soon as you take a quiz or a test. So all the information you've crammed in there will just go poof because you never really understood it. And at worst, if this information that you have not sufficiently understood, that you haven't really grasped, if this information is vital to your professional career, then you're going to have a lot of problems when you're competing for jobs, competing in the workplace against people with a similar background, competing for the same job, who do understand what they're talking about. And this idea of understanding what you're doing, of being able to think more deeply than just spitting out definitions or other memorized facts, this is what we mean by deep learning. And that's what you want to achieve as a college student, is deep learning. Not because I say so or your other professors say so, but because this is the key to being successful in your career. So what can you do to try and be an active reader so that you are going beyond just memorization and actually really understanding what it is that you're learning? In today's video, I'm going to offer a few tips. To begin, before you actually start reading, there is some work you need to do. Whatever the reading is, whatever the topic or subject, generally there are 3 questions you want to ask yourself before you actually begin the reading process. First, you want to be prepared to identify the thesis or main idea of whatever it is you're reading. Now, what this main idea, what this thesis will look like is, of course, going to be a function of what it is you're reading, what the material is, what the content is. But whether your reading is 5 pages long or 10 pages or 100 pages, there will be some main idea that you will be able to identify from that reading. And by identifying this main idea, this will help you begin in your mind to create a structure, a mental model, as we say in psychology, where you have this main idea, this main concept kind of in the middle of a chart, and then all the other details, all the other information associated with that you're reading about will then start to have natural connections that you can see. So this is why you want to go in and identify the main idea as quickly as possible. A well-written textbook, a well-written reading, by the way, will help you do this because a competent author will state outright what they believe the main idea is. So this is not that difficult in terms of how do I find this? How do I determine the main idea? But the key is, once you identify it, you want to keep it in mind and have it be in the back of your mind as you go forward and encounter the other ideas that are subsidiary to that main idea in the reading. You also want to ask yourself, what do I already know? All new learning builds upon old learning, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly. By directly, I mean, for example, if you're in a Chemistry 2 class, presumably you had to take Chemistry 1 previously. So Chemistry 2 is going to introduce ideas that build upon the ideas you learned in Chemistry 1. So this is a more direct relationship. In other cases, the prior knowledge, as we say in psychology, the prior knowledge that you're building upon may be a little more indirect. For example, once you learn the alphabet way back in elementary school, all the learning that comes after that requires you to have to learn by reading or writing or both. Of course, you're building upon your knowledge of the alphabet, right? This is a little more indirect, but it's still the same principle. So when you go into a reading, ask yourself, what do I already know about this subject? If the answer is nothing, if you're taking your first ever chemistry class, for example, if you've never studied chemistry, surely you've studied science before, so you might ask yourself, okay, I've never studied chemistry, but I've studied other sciences in high school, for example. So what might be some commonalities? What stuff do I already know that might apply to this new material? And by going in consciously trying to make those connections, that will help you pick up new material, because our brains love patterns. They love the familiar. And so if you can connect the new ideas you're being exposed to with stuff you already know or have already learned, that will actually make the process of learning the new material more efficient. Not easy necessarily, but easier. Sorry for the interruption, but if you're enjoying this video, please like, subscribe, and click on the bell icon for notifications. And then finally, the last question you want to ask yourself before you begin reading is, so what? Why does this material matter? If I'm reading about the U.S. Civil War in a U.S. history class, so what? How does this U.S. Civil War fit into the big picture, into the overall idea of American history? If I'm studying differential equations in a calculus class, so what? How does the idea of differential equations fit into the subject of calculus? The idea here is, again, because our brains love patterns, love connections. If you can find some meaning, some so what, in the new ideas you're being exposed to, mostly by connecting them with existing ideas as well as with this bigger picture of the topic, the discipline, the subject you're studying, chemistry, history, whatever, then even if it's not a conscious process, you will find that the new learning will be a little easier because you're making these connections. Now, once you begin reading, there are 4 techniques you can use while you're reading to help keep you on track, as well as, again, to help you achieve a deeper understanding of the material as opposed to just memorizing. First, be sure that you are identifying and becoming familiar with any new terms that you come across. This may sound quite straightforward, but unfortunately I've seen many college students who are trying to make a good effort to engage with reading, but especially if it's a subject or a discipline you've never studied before or don't have a lot of familiarity with, naturally you're going to come across terms in your readings that you've never seen, that you don't know what they mean. Sometimes, with a little effort, you can puzzle out these terms from using what we call context clues, meaning you read the stuff before the word, the stuff after the word. Sometimes that can help you figure out what that term, that vocabulary word, that concept really means. Other times you may need to look at a dictionary or go on the internet and try and do a search to find an explicit definition of a particular word. But whatever the case is, whichever approach you use, looking up a definition or trying to figure out from the reading itself, don't skip over words. Don't let your mind push you to just ignore, well, I'm not sure what this means, but I'll come back to it later. First of all, you may not come back to it later. Second of all, our brains love to be lazy. Our brains don't want to put forth more effort than they absolutely have to. So it's easy, if you're just memorizing, to just memorize how a word is spelled or pronounced, or even be able to spit out some definition. But if you can't really grasp what it is you're talking about, then you don't really have a deep understanding of that concept. So you come across a word, a term, that's new and unfamiliar, make sure you understand what that concept is about, even if it's just in a general way, first before you go on, because otherwise you'll end up having a hole in your knowledge as you're trying to continue through the reading. A second technique you can use to help make sure that you are really understanding what you're reading and not just memorizing is by creating self-testing questions. As you go through, pause periodically every few paragraphs, or if it's a textbook, it'll probably be divided up into different sections. Pause after every section, and if you have hopefully identified the main idea, you've thought about what do I already know about this idea, this concept, what is the so what of the concept, you've identified by that point any new or unfamiliar terms, start quizzing yourself. Make up questions to force you to have to take apart the information you've taken in and put it back together in order to answer a particular question. A simple technique you can use to begin with is just go through the reading, especially if it's a textbook. There will be section headings or subdivisions within the chapter typically. So if I'm reading a textbook chapter on the U.S. Civil War, usually there'll be a section in any kind of discussion about the U.S. Civil War, about the causes of the Civil War. So I'm reading through this book chapter, and there'll be a section that's titled Causes of the U.S. Civil War. Once I finish reading that, then one quick and easy self-test might be just to kind of turn around to that section heading and ask myself, what are the causes of the U.S. Civil War? And then see how many I can identify, how many I can repeat from what I've just read. Obviously, again, making sure you really understand what you're talking about and not just quoting the book verbatim. But that's one good technique for creating self-testing questions if you kind of are at a loss. But I think you'll find if you use this technique consistently, over time it'll become easier and easier for you to create the self-testing questions. A third technique to use while you're reading actively is to create diagrams, charts, graphs, other visualizations that might be helpful for you so that you are forcing yourself to not just, again, memorize the information, but take the information in and break it apart in your mind and put it back together in different ways. If you can take information and deconstruct it or break it apart and then put it back together in a chart or a graph or a diagram, that's a great hint that you really do have a deeper understanding of the information. Because if you're just memorizing, if all you know is A, B, C, D, it's very difficult to take that information apart and put it back together because you don't know if B really comes before D or does C really come after A, because all you've done is memorized a block of data, a block of words. So charts, diagrams, other kinds of visual representations of information can help you, while you're reading, verify that you really are getting a deeper understanding. And also, by the way, for later review, when you have to go back and review the information before an exam or because you need that information for a later class or to write a paper or what have you, having those notes will be very helpful as well. And then finally, the fourth technique that you can use while you are reading to make sure that you're getting a deep understanding of what you're doing is explain aloud what you have learned, what you've been reading about. Now, this can literally be explain aloud as in talk to another person. Of course, in some cases, you may have another person or you may be in a setting like the library or someplace where you don't necessarily have an opportunity to speak to another person or it would be inappropriate. Even if you're just sitting there kind of quietly talking to yourself in your own mind, if you can, again, take information, break it apart, put it back together in your own words, that's a great indicator that you are starting to develop a deeper understanding of the information you've been reading. So before I conclude, let me review briefly the ideas we've talked about today on this topic of active reading. First, you want to think about asking yourself 3 questions before you start reading to kind of set the stage, before you actually get deeply into the text that you are needing to review. Ask yourself, what's the main idea? Or as we say, what is the thesis? What do I already know about this topic? That'll help you make connections between the new information you're learning and stuff you've already learned in the past. And then what is the so what of this topic? How does this idea fit into this class I'm taking or this field, this area of chemistry, U.S. history, whatever the subject matter happens to be? And then we also discussed 4 techniques you can use while reading that'll help you ensure that you are reading actively, but also improve your deeper understanding of the material. You want to identify new and unfamiliar terms so that you're not having gaps or holes in your knowledge. You understand any new terminology that comes along, so you are comfortable with it when it comes up later in the reading. You are using self-testing techniques to make sure that you're not just memorizing things, but you're actually being able to recall information. You might create charts, diagrams, outlines, other kinds of visualizations that'll help you review the material later, but also, again, by breaking apart information and putting it back together in your own words or in your own way. That is a great indicator that you are really understanding what you're doing instead of just memorizing. And then finally, if you explain aloud what you've learned, that will help you, again, prove that you know what you are doing or what you're talking about, but also put you through the process of having to, in your own way, put this information out and explain the information. And that can not just provide proof that you are beginning to understand the ideas, but that you're also able to apply them to actually answer real-world questions, the way you would see not just in a test or a quiz, but also to solve real-world problems. I hope you found this information helpful, and again, I encourage you to watch certainly all the videos in this series. I think would be helpful for a college student, but especially the prior 3 episodes that I identified on learning inside and outside of class and active listening, as well as this video on active reading. Those 4 together in particular can help you understand, think about, improve your skills as a strong independent learner. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll click on the thumbs up icon below. And if you really enjoyed it, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications by clicking on the bell icon. YouTube will notify you of future videos added to this channel. Remember, college success is challenging, it takes work and effort, but it is certainly within your grasp. Good luck.